The outsider's calculation. The invitation arrived like clockwork, its heavy cream envelope bearing the embossed gold logo of Pinnacle Financial Group. Octavia Winters held it between slender fingers, the morning light from her apartment window illuminating the elaborate calligraphy that spelled her name. For the 6th consecutive year, she was invited to the firm's prestigious annual gala, the networking event of the season for Wall Street's elite. And for what would be the 6th time, she prepared to decline. Octavia placed the invitation beside her laptop, returning her attention to the complex lines of code filling her screen. The algorithm she had been perfecting over the past 3 years was finally nearing completion. Rows of data streamed across her monitor, painting a picture of market movements that no one else at Pinnacle could see. "Not this time," she murmured, a rare smile tugging at her lips as she took a sip of her now cold coffee. At 34, Octavia had spent the past 8 years at Pinnacle, rising to the position of senior analyst through sheer brilliance rather than political maneuvering. Her reserved demeanor and preference for solitary work had earned her a reputation as a competent but unremarkable employee, exactly as she had intended. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague. "Benjamin Reed, got your invitation? Dominic's making attendance mandatory this year. Even for the brilliant recluses among us." Dominic Reeves, Pinnacle's CEO, had always been dismissive of Octavia's potential. 3 years ago, she had approached him with early projections about market vulnerabilities and a proposal for a new algorithmic approach to trading. He had barely glanced at her presentation before handing it off to his protege, Harrison Wells. "Your analysis lacks vision, Ms. Winters," he had said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Stick to what you're good at, supporting the real innovators on our team." That evening, Octavia had withdrawn her substantial personal savings and begun independently developing what Dominic had rejected. Now her algorithm could predict market movements with 87% accuracy, a revolutionary advancement that would transform the industry. Her apartment had become a command center, with 3 monitors displaying continuous data streams and walls covered in complex flowcharts. She lived modestly despite her comfortable salary, channeling her resources into computing power and proprietary data access. Octavia replied to Benjamin, "Tell Dominic I'll be there." The response came immediately. "Is the world ending? Octavia Winters at a social function?" She smiled and returned to her work. This year would be different. Her algorithm had just predicted a significant market correction that none of Pinnacle's analysts had foreseen. The correction would begin precisely 3 days after the gala, perfect timing for her purposes. That evening, Octavia visited an exclusive boutique in Manhattan, a place she normally would have avoided. The saleswoman approached her hesitantly, unused to seeing the plainly dressed woman among their luxury clientele. "I need something memorable," Octavia stated simply. "Something that makes a statement." 2 hours later, she left with a gown that cost more than 3 months' rent, an investment in her future that would pay dividends far beyond its price tag. The week before the gala, Octavia meticulously prepared her presentation materials while continuing to decline lunch invitations from colleagues suddenly interested in her attendance. Harrison Wells, who had built his rising career partly on ideas similar to those Octavia had originally proposed, seemed particularly anxious about her unexpected decision to attend. "Octavia, heard you're finally joining us this year," he said, leaning against her office doorway with forced casualness. "Any particular reason for the change of heart?" "Just time for a change," she replied without looking up from her computer. "Dominic did make it mandatory after all." Harrison lingered uncomfortably. "You know, I've been meaning to discuss some of your recent reports with you. There are some interesting parallels to work my team is doing." "Are there?" Octavia finally looked up, her expression neutral despite the anger simmering beneath. "How fascinating. We should definitely discuss that. At the gala, perhaps." On the night of the event, Octavia stood in her apartment, barely recognizing the woman in the mirror. The deep blue gown transformed her usual practical appearance, highlighting elegance she typically concealed. Her normally tied-back hair fell in soft waves, and subtle makeup enhanced her striking features as she gathered her small clutch containing a specialized drive with her complete algorithm and evidence of its success. Octavia thought about the years of being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. She thought about Dominic's condescension and Harrison's theft of her concepts. Tonight, everyone who had ignored her would finally see her. Not just see her. They would be unable to look away. Time to collect what I'm owed, she whispered to her reflection, and stepped out into the night that would change everything. The unexpected revelation. The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom glittered with New York's financial elite. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the gathered crowd, illuminating designer gowns and bespoke suits as executives engaged in the careful dance of networking. At the center stood Dominic Reeves, Pinnacle Financial's CEO, gesturing animatedly to a circle of admiring investors. Our projections for the next quarter are unprecedented, he boasted, champagne glass raised. Harrison's team has developed analytics that... The sentence died on his lips as the ballroom doors opened. Octavia Winters stood at the threshold, a vision in midnight blue. The chatter diminished to whispers, then to silence as heads turned toward the unexpected arrival. She moved with deliberate grace, her usual swift efficiency transformed into something magnetic. Is that Winters? Someone whispered. From analytics? Can't be, came the response. Too commanding. Benjamin Reed was the first to approach her, genuine pleasure lighting his features. You actually came. And you're... He gestured vaguely, searching for an appropriate word. Devastating. Thank you, Benjamin, Octavia replied with a rare smile. Would you mind introducing me to the Blackstone representatives? I understand they're considering a partnership. Across the room, Harrison Wells nearly choked on his champagne. What is she doing? He hissed to his assistant. And who is she talking to? Blackstone's investment committee, the assistant replied, checking her phone. They control the portfolio Dominic has been pursuing for months. Harrison set down his glass with excessive force. Keep an eye on her. Something's not right. Meanwhile, Francesca Delacour observed the scene with shrewd interest. As Pinnacle's former head of strategy and Octavia's one-time mentor, she recognized the calculated precision in her protégé's movements. 3 years into her retirement, Francesca had been invited as an honored guest, though she suspected her real purpose was to reassure nervous investors about Pinnacle's direction. She's finally making her move, Francesca murmured to herself, a mixture of pride and concern coloring her voice. Octavia navigated the room strategically, spending exactly the right amount of time with each key player. To the Japanese investors, she spoke knowledgeably about Tokyo market trends. With the European contingent, she discussed regulatory shifts with remarkable insight. Each conversation left her listeners impressed and curious. Dominic finally intercepted her near the bar, his characteristic confidence slightly diminished. Octavia, what a surprise. I don't believe I've seen you at one of these functions before. I've been invited every year, she replied smoothly. This time the circumstances seemed appropriate. You look different, he observed, his gaze assessing. Appearances can be deceptive, Octavia said, something you emphasized when you dismissed my proposal 3 years ago. A flash of discomfort crossed Dominic's face. Business decisions are rarely personal, Ms. Winters. I hope you understand that. Perfectly. Just as I hope you'll understand what comes next. Before Dominic could respond, the evening's formal program began. The company's board chairman called for attention, welcoming the gathering before introducing Dominic for the keynote address. As Dominic took the stage, Octavia positioned herself near the audiovisual control station, exchanging a brief nod with Benjamin, who had arranged her access with a generous donation to the technician's favorite charity. Ladies and gentlemen, Dominic began, Pinnacle stands at the forefront of financial innovation. Our predictive models, developed by our visionary team led by Harrison Wells, have consistently... The large screen behind him suddenly shifted, interrupting his carefully crafted presentation. Instead of the prepared slides, a complex visualization appeared, Octavia's algorithm working in real time, processing market data with breathtaking efficiency. What is this? Dominic stammered, turning to see the display. Octavia stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. This, Mr. Reeves, is the future of financial prediction, something I offered Pinnacle 3 years ago. She moved toward the stage with measured steps, the audience parting before her. Tomorrow, the Singapore markets will open down 3.2%. By midday trading in London, we'll see unusual movement in energy futures. And 3 days from now, she paused, looking directly at Dominic, A correction will begin that none of your current models have identified. Harrison pushed through the crowd. This is absurd. You can't possibly— Actually, she can, interrupted Francesca Delacour, moving to stand beside Octavia. I recognized F. As if on cue, the display showed historical data from the past 6 months, revealing how Octavia's predictions had anticipated major market movements while Pinnacle's official forecasts had missed them entirely. The atmosphere in the ballroom transformed from shock to intense interest. Investors began moving toward Octavia, business cards extended, questions forming. Dominic stepped down from the stage, his expression a careful mask. You've made quite an impression, Ms. Winters, but remember who signs your paychecks. Octavia met his gaze with steady confidence. For now, she replied, but after tomorrow I suspect there will be numerous offers on the table. As the night progressed, the balance of power continued its inexorable shift. Harrison watched helplessly as investors who had once courted him now clustered around Octavia. Dominic huddled with board members, their expressions grave, and Francesca Delacour approached her former student with newfound respect. You played the long game, she said quietly. Impressive. I learned from the best, Octavia replied. What happens next? Francesca asked. Octavia gazed across the room, where Dominic and Harrison conferred urgently. Next, she said, they discover what it means to underestimate the quiet one in the room. The rightful recognition. The morning after the gala, Octavia arrived at Pinnacle's offices earlier than usual. The security guard did a double take, suddenly recognizing the woman whose ID photo had never matched the commanding presence she now projected. Morning. Ms. Winters, he said, straightening reflexively. You're all over the financial news today? Indeed, her phone had been buzzing continuously since dawn. The Wall Street Journal had already run a piece titled, Algorithm Queen, the Analyst Who Could Reshape Markets. Bloomberg had requested an exclusive interview, and LinkedIn showed over 200 connection requests from industry leaders. Octavia nodded politely and continued to her office, where she found a notification for an emergency board meeting at 9 a.m. As she expected, Dominic was attempting damage control. At precisely 8:58, she entered the boardroom carrying only a small tablet. Board members were already seated, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Dominic stood at the head of the table, flanked by Harrison and the company's legal counsel, Patricia Westbrook. Ms. Winters, Dominic began without preamble, your actions last night constituted a serious breach of company protocol and potentially violated your confidentiality agreement. Octavia took a seat, her composure unruffled. My algorithm was developed entirely on my personal time, using my personal resources. I never utilized Pinnacle's proprietary data or systems. That would be difficult to prove, Harrison interjected. Actually, Octavia replied, it's quite simple. She placed her tablet on the table. I've maintained meticulous records of my independent development process, including time-stamped code repositories and financial transactions for all resources purchased. She swiped through screens showing the evidence. Additionally, my algorithm operates on fundamentally different principles than anything Pinnacle has developed, including the innovations. Mr. Wells claimed credit for after dismissing my initial proposal. The board chairman, Theodore Hammond, leaned forward. Are you suggesting intellectual theft, Ms. Winters? I'm stating facts, Mr. Hammond. Facts that would become public in any litigation. Patricia Westbrook cleared her throat. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before. The boardroom door opened, and Francesca Delacour entered uninvited, followed by a distinguished older man Octavia recognized as Jerome Blackstone, head of Blackstone Investments. I hope I'm not interrupting, Francesca said pleasantly. Jerome and I thought our perspective might be valuable to this discussion. Dominic's face reddened. This is a private meeting. As a significant shareholder, I believe Mr. Blackstone has standing to attend, Francesca countered. And as the person who originally recognized Ms. Winters' potential, I have relevant historical context. Theodore Hammond, sensing shifting allegiances, nodded. Please join us. Jerome Blackstone took a seat directly across from Octavia. Ms. Winters, my team spent the night analyzing the predictions you revealed yesterday. Your Singapore forecast was accurate to within 0.3 percentage points. The room fell silent. More importantly, he continued, we've compared your methodology with Pinnacle's current models. The difference is not incremental, it's revolutionary. Dominic attempted to regain control. Mr. Blackstone, while we appreciate your interest, this remains an internal matter concerning an employee who has options. Blackstone interrupted smoothly. I've already extended an offer to Ms. Winters that includes full ownership of her intellectual property and a position as Director of Quantitative Strategy at Blackstone. Harrison paled visibly. Patricia Westbrook began frantically writing notes. Octavia maintained her calm exterior, though satisfaction coursed through her. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackstone. However, I believe there's unfinished business here at Pinnacle. She turned to the board members. For 3 years, I've watched my ideas be dismissed, then partially implemented without credit. I've been passed over for promotions despite consistently outperforming my colleagues. Yesterday wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition. Theodore Hammond studied her thoughtfully. What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Winters? A restructuring of Pinnacle's analytics division with me as executive director. Complete autonomy over my team and algorithm development, a seat on the executive committee, and appropriate compensation, including retroactive recognition for my contributions. Dominic laughed incredulously. That's absurd. The board would never. I move to consider Ms. Winters' proposal, interrupted a board member who had remained silent until now. The market opens in 30 minutes, and I'd prefer we have a solution before trading begins. What followed was the most extraordinary negotiation of Octavia's career. By noon, she had secured everything she requested, plus equity options that would make her one of Pinnacle's largest individual shareholders within 5 years. Harrison was reassigned to client relations, where your personable nature will be an asset, Theodore Hammond had explained with thinly veiled irony, and Dominic, while maintaining his CEO title, found his authority significantly diminished by the board's new oversight committee, which would include Octavia. As the meeting concluded, Francesca lingered behind with Octavia. Why stay? She asked quietly. After how they treated you, why not take Blackstone's offer? Octavia glanced through the glass walls to where Dominic was engaged in heated conversation with Harrison. Because leaving would be easier for them, she replied. I want them to witness what they nearly lost. Every day, Francesca smiled with approval. You'll transform this place. That's the plan. That afternoon, Octavia moved into her new corner office, Harrison's former space. As she arranged her few personal items, Benjamin appeared in the doorway. So, he said with a grin, drinks tonight to celebrate the new executive director? Octavia considered the offer, thinking of all the invitations she had declined over the years. Yes, she decided. I think it's time I started accepting invitations. As Benjamin left, Octavia turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The financial world had ignored her for years, dismissing her quiet brilliance as insignificance now. They would never make that mistake again. I'll continue with part 2 of The Silent Strategist and then create parts 3, 4, and 5 to expand the story further. Part 2. The Unexpected Revelation. The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom glittered with New York's financial elite. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the gathered crowd, illuminating designer gowns and bespoke suits as executives engaged in the careful dance of networking. At the center stood Dominic Reeves, Pinnacle Financial's CEO, gesturing animatedly to a circle of admiring investors. Our projections for the next quarter are unprecedented, he boasted, champagne glass raised. Harrison's team has developed analytics that. The sentence died on his lips as the ballroom doors opened. Octavia Winters stood at the threshold, a vision in midnight blue. The chatter diminished to whispers, then to silence as heads turned toward the unexpected arrival. She moved with deliberate grace, her usual swift efficiency transformed into something magnetic. Is that Winters? Someone whispered. From analytics? Can't be, came the response. Too commanding. Benjamin Reed was the first to approach her, genuine pleasure lighting his features. You actually came, and you're. He gestured vaguely, searching for an appropriate word. Devastating. Thank you, Benjamin, Octavia replied with a rare smile. Would you mind introducing me to the Blackstone representatives? I understand they're considering a partnership. Across the room, Harrison Wells nearly choked on his champagne. What is she doing? He hissed to his assistant. And who is she talking to? Blackstone's investment committee, the assistant replied, checking her phone. They control the portfolio Dominic has been pursuing for months. Harrison set down his glass with excessive force. Keep an eye on her. Something's not right. Meanwhile, Francesca Delacour observed the scene with shrewd interest. As Pinnacle's former head of strategy and Octavia's one-time mentor, she recognized the calculated precision in her protégé's movements. 3 years into her retirement, Francesca had been invited as an honored guest, though she suspected her real purpose was to reassure Anno. That too, they moved to the small sitting area in the corner of Octavia's office. Through the windows, the Manhattan skyline glittered in the late afternoon sun. Have you heard from Harrison? Francesca asked. Octavia shook her head. Not directly. I understand he's thriving in client relations. Apparently his talent for taking credit translates well to taking lunch orders. Francesca laughed. Karma has a sense of humor. She paused, her expression growing serious. What about personally, Octavia? Your professional transformation has been remarkable, but have you allowed any changes in your private life? The question caught Octavia off guard. In truth, while her professional world had expanded dramatically, her personal life remained largely unchanged. Her apartment still functioned more as a workspace than a home. Her social interactions outside of Pinnacle were minimal. I've been focused on establishing the division, she deflected. You've always been focused, Francesca countered gently. That's your strength. But there's a risk in defining yourself solely through your work. Before Octavia could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from Benjamin. Emergency. Trading floor. Now. I have to go, she said, already moving toward the door. When she reached the trading floor, she found it in controlled chaos. Traders stared at screens showing markets in freefall across Asia. Benjamin met her at the entrance. It started in Singapore 15 minutes ago, he explained. Some kind of algorithmic trading pattern we've never seen before. Octavia scanned the data, recognition dawning. This isn't random. Someone's using a predictive system similar to mine. How is that possible? Benjamin asked. I don't know, Octavia replied, her mind already working through the implications, but I intend to find out. As traders scrambled to protect client positions, Octavia returned to her office and initiated a deep analysis of the trading patterns. Hours passed as she identified the fingerprints of a familiar approach, an approach that only one other person would recognize. Near midnight, she sent a message to an address she hadn't used in years. I see your algorithm in today's movements. We should talk. Oh, the response came almost immediately. Tomorrow. Cafe Nero, 7 a.m. Octavia stared at the screen, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Harrison Wells had somehow replicated aspects of her work. Tomorrow would determine whether he was adversary or ally in the new financial landscape she had created. As she finally left the office, Octavia reflected on Francesca's question about her personal life. Perhaps it was time to expand her vision beyond Pinnacle, beyond algorithms, beyond the careful isolation she had maintained for years. After all, the quiet one in the room had proven her point. Now came the more complex challenge, deciding what victory truly meant. The new Equilibrium Cafe Nero at 7 a.m. was nearly empty, its rich aroma of espresso cutting through the crisp autumn air. Octavia arrived 5 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a clear view of both entrances. Old habits died hard. Strategic positioning had become second nature. Harrison arrived exactly on time, dressed not in his usual bespoke suit but casual attire, dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater. He looked different, less polished, somehow more authentic. Octavia, he acknowledged with a nod, taking the seat across from her. Harrison, you've been busy. A server approached and they both ordered espresso. When she departed, Harrison leaned forward. I suppose I should thank you, he said, surprising Octavia. Being demoted was the best thing that ever happened to me. She raised an eyebrow. Explain. After the gala, I had 2 choices. Wallow in resentment or learn from it. He shrugged. I chose the latter. Left Pinnacle 3 months ago to start fresh. At a competing firm, apparently. Harrison shook his head. Not exactly. I founded Parallax Analytics, We're developing predictive models for humanitarian applications, natural disaster response, refugee movement patterns, disease outbreak forecasting. Octavia hadn't expected this. Yesterday's market disruption? An unintended consequence, Harrison explained. We were tracking resource allocation patterns following the earthquake in Indonesia. Our system identified inefficiencies in emergency supply procurement, but it triggered automated trading responses we hadn't anticipated. He looked genuinely troubled. We're working to isolate the financial impact vectors. I recognized your distinctive countermeasures in the trading data. That's how I knew you'd identified our fingerprint. Octavia studied him, searching for deception, but finding none. The Harrison before her seemed fundamentally changed from the ambitious opportunist she had known. Why the humanitarian focus? She asked finally. Harrison was quiet for a moment. After your algorithm demonstration, I realized I'd spent years chasing the wrong metrics. Success, validation, recognition. He gestured dismissively. When I saw what you had created, truly revolutionary technology, I started thinking about what such predictive power could accomplish beyond making wealthy people wealthier. Their espressos arrived, creating a momentary pause. I don't expect forgiveness, Harrison continued. What I did with your initial proposal was wrong. But I am asking for a conversation about collaboration. Collaboration? Octavia repeated skeptically. Your financial models combined with our humanitarian applications could create something unprecedented. His eyes lit with genuine passion. Imagine predicting not just market movements but resource needs during crises, population movements during conflicts, optimal distribution networks for vaccines. Despite her lingering distrust, Octavia found herself intrigued. Her algorithm had always been about patterns, human behavior translated into data. Finance was simply one application of a much broader capability. I'd need to see your operation, she said cautiously. Understand exactly what you're developing. Of course, Harrison agreed immediately. Tomorrow? Our offices are in Brooklyn. Nothing like Pinnacle's glass tower, but we're doing interesting work. Octavia nodded slowly. Tomorrow. As they finished their espressos, Harrison asked, How's the spin-off planning going? Octavia's surprise must have shown on her face. Theodore Hammond mentioned it, Harrison explained. We still golf occasionally. It's proceeding, she replied neutrally. The board votes next week. It's the right move, Harrison said. Your vision needs space to evolve. They parted with a tentative plan to meet the following day. As Octavia walked toward Pinnacle, she found herself considering possibilities she hadn't previously entertained. The algorithm that had begun as her vindication could become something far more significant. At Pinnacle, she found Benjamin waiting outside her office. Where have you been? He asked. Dominic's called an emergency executive meeting in 10 minutes. Octavia quickly reviewed the morning's financial data. Markets had stabilized, but yesterday's disruption had spooked investors. Perfect timing for Dominic to attempt reasserting control. In the executive conference room, Dominic stood at the whiteboard, outlining a strategic response plan that effectively proposed restricting Octavia's team's autonomy. Yesterday's events demonstrate the need for more integrated oversight, he concluded, looking directly at Octavia. While Ms. Winter's models are impressive, they clearly failed to anticipate this disruption. Octavia remained calm. Actually, my team identified the pattern within minutes and implemented countermeasures that limited client exposure to 0.3%. The broader market suffered 2.1% losses. Nevertheless, Dominic pressed, this incident raises questions about the wisdom of spinning off your division at this juncture. Theodore Hammond, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. Dominic, is there actual evidence that integration would have prevented yesterday's market response? It's a matter of coordinated risk management, Dominic insisted, which Ms. Winter's team executed exceptionally well, Hammond noted. In fact, their independence allowed for faster response time. The meeting continued in this vein, with Dominic's arguments systematically dismantled by performance data. When it concluded, the spin-off plan remained on track for the board vote. As executives filed out, Francesca Delacour appeared in the doorway. Interesting session, she observed. Dominic's getting desperate. He's becoming irrelevant, Octavia replied quietly. The company has evolved beyond his vision. They walked together toward Octavia's office. I met with Harrison this morning, she added. Francesca raised an eyebrow. Voluntary contact with Harrison Wells? Now that is evolutionary change. Octavia briefly explained Harrison's new venture and proposed collaboration. Francesca listened thoughtfully. People can surprise you, she said finally. Sometimes even positively. I'm reserving judgment until I see his operation, Octavia replied. Wise, but also consider what you truly want next, Octavia. Francesca stopped, facing her former protégé directly. You've proven yourself. You've secured your position. The question now is, what mission actually matters to you? The question lingered as Octavia spent the afternoon reviewing spin-off documentation with Patricia Westbrook. The legal framework was nearly complete, with Octavia positioned as CEO of the new entity, Winters Predictive Systems. That evening, rather than working late as usual, Octavia left at a reasonable hour. On impulse, she accepted a long-standing invitation from Eliza Tran to join her team for drinks. At the trendy rooftop bar, Octavia observed her analyst relaxing, joking, forming bonds beyond professional collaboration. For years, she had maintained careful distance from such interactions, focusing solely on her work. Now, as she cautiously engaged in conversation, she discovered unexpected pleasure in connecting with these brilliant minds on a personal level. The following morning, she took a car to Brooklyn. Harrison's offices occupied the renovated top floor of an old warehouse. Open space, abundant natural light, and walls covered with maps and data visualizations far different from Pinnacle's financial dashboards. A diverse team of analysts, developers, and what appeared to be field researchers worked at clustered stations. Harrison greeted her at the elevator. Welcome to Parallax, he said, gesturing to the space. Not quite what you're used to, I imagine. It's unexpected, Octavia admitted. For the next 3 hours, Harrison introduced her to his team and demonstrated their projects. They had developed systems tracking climate migration patterns in Southeast Asia. They were modeling medical supply distribution networks in sub-Saharan Africa. Their newest initiative aimed to predict food insecurity hotspots 6 months in advance. The work was sophisticated and genuinely impactful. More surprisingly, Harrison had created an organizational culture that valued collaboration over competition. The opposite of Pinnacle's environment. Your algorithm's pattern recognition capabilities would transform our predictive accuracy, Harrison explained as they reviewed a particularly complex model. And our humanitarian applications could expand your technology's purpose. By the time they reached his modest office, Octavia had made her decision. I'm interested in collaboration, she said carefully. But with clear boundaries, Harrison nodded. Of course. What do you propose? After the spin-off is complete, Winters Predictive Systems will develop a separate division focused on non-financial applications. We'll create a joint research initiative with Parallax, sharing certain algorithmic components while maintaining independent operations. That could work, Harrison agreed, looking genuinely pleased. I never expected to be partners. We're not partners yet, Octavia clarified. Consider this a provisional exploration of mutual benefit. As she left Brooklyn, Octavia felt an unfamiliar sense of possibility. For years, her singular focus had been proving her worth within Pinnacle's narrow framework. Now, with that goal achieved, larger questions emerged. The week passed in a blur of preparation. The board unanimously approved the spin-off, with Pinnacle retaining a 30% stake in Winters Predictive Systems. Dominic, outmaneuvered and diminished, announced his decision to pursue new opportunities shortly thereafter. On her final day at Pinnacle's offices, Octavia packed the few personal items from her corner office. Benjamin leaned against the doorframe watching. So, executive director to CEO in 6 months, he said. Not bad for someone who used to decline party invitations. Octavia smiled. Speaking of which, I believe you're hosting a farewell gathering tonight. And you're actually coming? Benjamin asked, surprised. I am. As he left to spread the news of this unprecedented development, Francesca arrived to say goodbye. You've achieved everything you set out to do here, she observed, looking around the now empty office. Are you satisfied? Octavia considered the question. I'm evolving my definition of satisfaction. Francesca smiled knowingly. The best revenge isn't just success. It's finding purpose beyond the battle. That evening, surrounded by her team at Benjamin's stylish apartment, Octavia found herself genuinely enjoying the celebration. When Theodore Hammond raised a toast to her success, She felt a moment of perfect clarity. The quiet one in the room had not only commanded attention, she had transcended the very need for it. Her value no longer required external validation. 3 months later, Winter's predictive systems occupied the top floors of a converted industrial building in Chelsea. The space balanced Octavia's preference for precision with comfortable collaborative areas. Her office featured both state-of-the-art technology and, surprisingly, living plants, a small concession to Benjamin's insistence that genius needs oxygen. On her desk sat a single-framed photograph, her team at the farewell party, laughing and unified. Beside it lay the original invitation to the gala that had changed everything. As she reviewed the latest results from the joint initiative with Parallax, remarkably promising predictions for drought response in East Africa, Octavia reflected on how thoroughly her life had transformed. The algorithm that began as her silent revenge had evolved into something far more meaningful. The woman who had been overlooked now led an organization that looked beyond profit to possibility, and the strategist who had once calculated every move in isolation now recognized the exponential power of connection. The invitation that started it all remained on her desk, a reminder that sometimes showing up changes everything.